provocative book, Dead People, Crazy People, Drugs, and Politicians. I've noted that in recent years, not as many Louisiana politicos have been indicted. Well, Chris Warner and Terry King, they have a book showing some of the major players, mainly in law enforcement, who have run afoul of the law. Terry King's a Watson native, graduate of Southern Mississippi, master's from LSU, and the son of an editor of a statewide newspaper. And Chris Warner, who's been with us a few times, has undergraduate and graduate degrees from LSU, a doctorate from the University of New Orleans. He's the author of many books about sports and politics, and they have collaborated on this Dead People, Crazy People, Drugs, and Politicians. And the book comes with a warning that politicians lie, cheat, and steal. The contents of this book are hazardous to their career. Terry King, I understand you got a call from the governor the other day. He's reading your book.
Yes, we did. We dropped off 194 copies of it to the legislature, and a crazy little stunt that seems to have paid off.
Well, and the governor, of course, as Foster Campbell says, he's got quite a megaphone now. One of the big issues in the state, in fact, today, Scott Sternberg, the noted attorney who is involved in First Amendment cases, he'll be at the Baton Rouge Press Club. He is speaking about this lack of sunlight bill. It basically would gut the state's open records laws. And Chris Warner, you have a chapter along with Terry. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. I think conservatives and liberals and moderates, whatever your political persuasion is, can take note from Lee Zurich, the noted reporter in New Orleans. He's benefited, and he testified against this legislation. What happens? What happens if it's passed?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned Lee Zurich. Thank you, Jim, for having us, too. It's apropos that you mentioned him because he testified against the bill when it went to the committee. I saw him on one of the news reports about the bill, and he makes a living off of FOIA requests. You know, he plies his trade by requesting information, documents that he said are owned by the citizens, which I thought was a really poignant statement. That's true. We do own those documents because many of the emails and correspondence that legislators have between each other are on devices that were bought with taxpayer money, and that's the rub. We really do own their correspondence if they're corresponding on their computers and if they're acting on behalf of the taxpayer. So I agree. I agree with.
And
Lee
quite
Zurich.
often, when there are public records open for review by media people, they report stories. And Andrea Gallo in Sunday's Advocate noted that without those records that were available under the current law, that Ray Nagin would never have been found out, and he would have probably served out his term in New Orleans, but he went to jail. Got out early because of COVID, but nonetheless, there's an example of how public records changed the fabric of New Orleans. So why is the legislature going this route in your judgment?
Well, that is the big question here. Many people have asked me, why are they doing that? And I don't understand it either. I don't think it's something that is more pressing than improving our insurance rates, our roads that need attention, our education system that's failing. And we could continue to go on, things that affect our quality of life in a negative way in Louisiana. So this has been a surprise to many people, but I believe in the governor, and I believe he's going to get it right. I know he's reached out to Terry and the concerned citizens of St. Tammany, who really wouldn't be so successful putting 30 people in prison in St. Tammany Parish had it not been for records requests.
Well, and St. Tammany has a big focus in this book. And it is the most affluent, most educated parish in Louisiana. And yet there has been, as you note, gobs of misconduct at various levels of St. Tammany government, including a sheriff who was elected 5 times. And this particular sheriff, Jack Strain, was convicted on 4 counts of aggravated rape, 2 counts of aggravated incest, 1 count of molestation of a juvenile, 1 count of sexual battery, 4 life sentences without parole for 4 rape charges, and he was also involved in some other issues that people found fault with. But how could that happen in St. Tammany Parish, Terry, this beacon of light in Louisiana?
Well, I believe one of the big problems there is if you're white, wealthy, and without legal problems, you don't pay attention to what's going on in the community. And that's what was going on in St. Tammany. You had all of this stuff that was happening in the jails and the work release program, which is how we uncovered the sex crimes, was public records, getting that information, and also having inmates turn over information to us.
877-217-5757, a riveting read, Dead People, Crazy People, Drugs and Politicians. It's about Louisiana politicos who have run afoul of the law. We're back after this. This is Jim Engster. You're listening to Talk Louisiana. A few more minutes with Terry King and Chris Warner, authors of Dead People, Crazy People, Drugs and Politicians. It's about Louisiana politicos who've gone afoul of the law, primarily in St. Tammany Parish, and Terry has been involved for many years with concerned citizens of St. Tammany. What was the primary motivation for the book?
My wife worked for the coroner in St. Tammany, and he fired her when she refused to commit grant fraud. And we went through the steps of going to the EEOC, and that's when I found out that he was also sexually harassing her and refused to stop. In fact, said he wouldn't stop because he was a doctor and he heals with his hands.
Okay, well, that would get you involved, and I'm glad you didn't mention the person's name. Thank you. But at any rate, Greg Ferries, who many of us in Louisiana remember as the chief of police here, and he lost a close race in 2007 for sheriff to Sid Gautreaux. He writes the foreword, and Chris, I know you believe that among many law enforcement people who you take exception with, you like Greg Ferries a whole lot. Why?
I don't take exception to really any law enforcement people.
Well, so when they go afoul of the law, you do.
Of course, I would. But they have a difficult job. But I certainly respect Mr. Ferris, and he gave us the idea for the title, the catchy title, in that it's a description of the responsibilities of a coroner in Louisiana. They deal with dead people, crazy people, drugs, and their politicians. And oddly enough, in Louisiana, the coroner is the only person who can arrest the sheriff, and only for 72 hours.
Really? Well, Ferries writes the foreword, and St. Tammany Parish, he writes, was a sanctuary for New Orleanians with means to own a summer home or frequent its hotels and inns. It's a beautiful place. I was at a nice event in Covington, and most of the people there, of course, are law-abiding, and I'm sure appalled at some of these politicians who've gone awry. But why do we not have better vigilance? For example, Jack Strain was elected 5 times. We're talking a guy who was in office for around 20 years. What compelled him to get away with stuff like this for so long?
He was very well organized with maintaining power. He knew how to grant favors and also to maintain law and order, at least what people thought was law and order. And of course, he had this seedy side of his life that he had to keep hidden from everybody. But he was masterful at controlling his victims by either employing them or putting them in jail and controlling them there.
And for 20 years he did it. And then he got his comeuppance, and he's probably never spend another day as a free man. But this is, as we noted, is not some hamlet where people are uneducated and unaware. You would think they would be aware, and he had to have great power to conceal all this for as long as he did.
Yes, he did.
One of the other things that Terry has pointed out, because he and I have sat around, particularly when I started writing the book with him, trying to figure out why. And that's what makes these type of stories so interesting. A true crime story like this involving politicians who rarely get caught, who are protected amongst their fraternity. This is fascinating. Why do they do this? Peter Galvin was making $300,000 a year. He had a local senator help him pass an obscure bill to set his own salary. He was paying himself for leave time that he was taking. And it was documented on Facebook and brought to light by Lee Zurich, the talented reporter who won the equivalent of the Pulitzer Prize for exposing this corruption. So it's fascinating to watch. And greed took over here. And then it opened the door for Terry and the concerned citizens to see all these other politicians that were committing crimes. And it's interesting because they form complaints, Jim, and when they put a written complaint with proof of criminality in front of the FBI, they have to act.
The book is Dead People, Crazy People, Drugs and Politicians from Terry King and Chris Warner. Thank you, gentlemen.